Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's story. In this episode, James and Diep face a heartbreaking challenge as they try to adopt little Nye. Just when they thought everything was falling into place, James's parents step in with fierce opposition, refusing to accept Nye because she doesn't follow their faith. The adoption process stalls, leaving Diep and James torn between family expectations and the child they love as their own. Will they find the strength to fight for Nye's future, or will pressure from both family and community tear their dream apart? Stay tuned until the end of the video to see what decision James and Diep will make, and don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world. In a quiet living room, the soft glow of a lamp flickers across Diep's troubled face. She sits curled on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling slightly as she voices her fears to James. What if we can't keep Nye with us? Her words spill out, shaky and raw, her eyes shimmering with tears. James leans forward, his gaze steady, trying to ground her. He doesn't dismiss her fears. He listens, his silence heavy with thought. Nye, after all, is no ordinary child in their lives. Abandoned once, she had finally found safety in Diep's care. To Diep, the thought of Nye being forced back into an orphanage feels unbearable, like watching a fragile bird caged after tasting freedom. She confesses how every night she dreams of Nye lost in cold hallways, surrounded by strangers who don't see her worth. The fear has been eating her alive. James places a hand over hers, his grip firm but warm. Diep, we can't let that happen. She belongs with us. His voice cuts through the air with conviction. He talks of lawyers, of paperwork, of the difficult road ahead, but each word is anchored in determination. The camera lingers on Diep's clenched fists, her knuckles white, as if she's gripping onto a thread of hope that could snap at any moment. But there's another storm waiting outside their walls: James's parents. When he brings up the adoption to them, the room shifts from calm to charged in an instant. His father leans back, face stern, while his mother crosses her arms, her expression etched with disapproval. She's a sweet child, James, his mother begins carefully, but she refuses to follow our faith. How will that work in this family? Her words are not laced with hatred, but with rigid conviction. In their eyes, adopting Nye means welcoming a daughter who doesn't share their belief, and that is something they cannot accept. James stiffens. Love isn't measured by religion, he replies firmly, his tone carrying both frustration and plea. She deserves a home, not rejection. His father's voice, deeper and more commanding, follows. You're thinking with your heart, not your head. This adoption will face endless resistance, not only from us, but from the church and community as well. Are you prepared for that? The camera shifts to Diep, who stands nearby, her lips pressed tightly together. Every word from James's parents stings, not because they doubt Nye's worth, but because they see her faith as a barrier. She wants to shout, to defend the girl who has already been through too much. But the lump in her throat keeps her silent. Later that night, James finds Diep sitting outside beneath the pale moonlight, her arms wrapped around herself. She looks up at him with weary eyes. What if they're right? What if we can't fight this battle? She whispers. James kneels beside her, his voice softer now. Then we'll keep fighting until there's no strength left in us. Because Nye deserves more than the world has given her. His words steady her, yet the weight of his parents' disapproval hangs heavy in the air. The following morning, they head to the police station for the adoption procedure, but the process halts abruptly. The officer, shuffling papers under the harsh glare of fluorescent light, shakes his head. The adoption cannot move forward right now. There's an objection from the family due to the child's refusal to follow the faith. Until this is settled, everything is on hold. Diep feels the floor give way beneath her. She clenches her jaw, fighting back tears. The camera zooms in on her hand, gripping her handbag so tightly that her knuckles turn pale. Beside her, James's posture stiffens, his jaw set like stone. "This isn't about faith," James counters, his tone low but sharp. "It's about giving a child a home." The officer sighs, clearly sympathetic, but bound by regulations. "Until there's a resolution, we can't release her. The law is complicated when family objections are raised, especially in cases involving religion." As they leave the office, Diep lingers in the hallway, her eyes fixed on the distant door, as if Nye might walk through at any moment. The camera captures James's shadow stretching across the tiled floor, a silent symbol of his determination. He reaches out, touching Diep's shoulder gently. "We're not done. This isn't the end." The days that follow feel endless. Each time Diep sees Nye, whether laughing in the garden or curled up with a book, the uncertainty gnaws at her heart. The bond between them is undeniable, yet the looming barrier makes it feel fragile. One afternoon, under the canopy of fruit trees, Nye stretches to pluck a grapefruit, her laughter ringing through the air like music. Diep steadies her with a smile, guiding her small hands. For a moment, the world feels perfect. The camera lingers on their faces. The joy, the love, the simple bond that asks for nothing more than acceptance. From a distance, James paces with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking firmly with the officer about land transfers and paperwork. "I've already signed the documents. Everything is prepared. All we ask is for fairness." His voice softens when he glances back at Diep and Nye, his eyes full of quiet determination. When he hangs up, James walks toward them, his expression gentler now. The paperwork is moving. Slowly, but it's moving, he reassures. Diep smiles faintly, handing a slice of fruit to Nye, who giggles. "Is it sweet, Ms. Diep?" Her innocence cuts through the tension, reminding Diep why she must fight no matter the cost. The camera closes in on Diep's face, her eyes shimmering with unspoken vows. Each slice of grapefruit she offers is more than food. It's a promise, a silent declaration that she will not abandon Nye, not again. As the scene fades, the trio sits together under the tree, laughter mingling with the rustling breeze. Yet in the background, the weight of James's parents' opposition lingers like an unseen shadow. Love binds them together, but the battle is far from over. The amber light of late afternoon spills across the small wooden table where Diep, James, and Nye gather. The room hums with warmth as James plays a simple guessing game, hiding a coin in one hand and asking Nye to choose. "Which hand?" he teases, and Nye's laughter bursts out, bubbling and free. filling the air like music. The camera zooms in on her radiant smile, that pure joy that has become the anchor in Diep's world. James smiles too, though beneath it lies a storm of worries. He clears his throat and shares what little progress they've made. The officer said the documents are nearly in order. Once this hurdle is resolved, Nye can start school. Diep pauses mid-slice, the knife stilling against the cutting board. Her eyes brighten at the thought, her mind racing ahead to picture Nye in a crisp school uniform, hair tied neatly, running with friends, free from the shadow of uncertainty. "You'll love it, Nye," she says softly, her voice full of hope. But just as the light seems to break through, James's parents visit. Their arrival brings tension that weighs heavy on the air. The father, dignified but stern, sits straight-backed, while the mother's lips press into a thin line. They watch as Nye plays in the yard, her laughter floating back into the house. But instead of softening, their expressions harden. "James," his mother says firmly, "we've thought about this again. It's not right. The child refuses to accept our faith. How will she be raised? How will she belong?" Her eyes flash to Diep, sharp, almost accusing. Diep lowers her gaze, her chest tightening. She wants to defend Nye, to shout that love should be enough, but the weight of their disapproval presses her into silence. James's father adds, his tone unyielding, "The adoption will never be approved smoothly. Even if the officers let it slide, the community will not accept it. You are inviting hardship into your future." James stands tall, his voice firm but trembling with frustration. "Hardship is worth it if it means Nye has a family. She is not a burden. She is our blessing. If you cannot see that, then so be it." The confrontation ends without resolution. His parents leave, their footsteps echoing like judgment in the quiet house. Diep watches James, whose jaw remains clenched, his hands shaking slightly as he tries to steady himself. He finally exhales, his eyes softening when they fall on her. "They'll never understand," he admits, almost to himself. That night, Diep lies awake, Nye asleep beside her. She studies the child's peaceful face, her small breath steady, her tiny hands clutching the blanket. A silent tear slips down Diep's cheek. She whispers into the darkness, "I'll protect you, no matter what it costs me." The following week, they return to the police station. The officer greets them with weary eyes. "I'm sorry, but until the family dispute is resolved, the adoption remains paused." His words drop like stones into their hearts. Diep grips James's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve as though holding on to him will keep her from collapsing. James answers calmly, though his voice wavers at the edges. "And if we can't resolve it?" The officer shakes his head. "Then it may be delayed indefinitely." The camera lingers on Diep's face, pale and drawn, her lips quivering as she bites back the cry clawing at her throat. James places a steady hand on her back, whispering, "We'll find a way." Outside, the afternoon sun blazes, but to Diep, the world feels cold. They walk in silence until Nye's small hand slips into hers. She looks down and sees Nye smiling up at her, eyes filled with trust. That smile ignites a spark inside Diep. The battle isn't over, and she cannot surrender. In the days that follow, James throws himself into action. He arranges meetings with community leaders, gently but firmly advocating for Nye. He transfers land into Diep's name to prove financial security, a sacrifice that silently speaks of his devotion. Each signature he scrawls across the papers is a vow. He will not let this child be taken from them. At home, Diep pours her energy into Nye's care. She teaches her small lessons, how to count coins, how to write her name, how to plant seeds in the garden. Each act is a declaration. Nye belongs here. The bond between them grows stronger, unshakable despite the outside world pressing against it. One evening, as the sky burns orange and purple, James finds Diep in the garden, watching Nye chase butterflies. "The officer told me something today," he says, his voice carrying both weariness and hope. "If we can show stability, if we keep proving our commitment, there's still a chance. It may take time, but it's not impossible." Diep turns to him, her eyes brimming with determination. Then we wait. We fight, whatever it takes. The camera pans to Nye, her laughter echoing in the fading light. That laughter becomes a melody threading through the scene, a reminder of why they endure. As night falls, the three of them share a simple dinner. The aroma of rice and vegetables fills the kitchen as Nye chatters about the day. James and Diep exchange quiet glances, each one carrying unspoken promises. In the closing shot, the trio steps into the garden, hand in hand. The moon rises, silver light bathing them as if sealing their bond. Nye's laughter mingles with the whisper of the breeze, fragile yet powerful, a symbol of resilience. Though the adoption remains paused, the love between them has already built a family stronger than paper, stronger than doubt. The future is uncertain, but their unity shines like a lantern in the dark, guiding them forward. Through resistance, through hardship, through every trial ahead. Love will be their shield, courage will be their weapon. And Nye, the little girl once abandoned, now has two hearts beating fiercely to call her own.